If you own F122, then you should know that the game has a selection of supercars for the first time in the series' history. There's a selection of 10 of them, from Aston Martins, Ferraris, McLarens and Mercedes, and 2 of those cars are just the official Formula 1 safety cars. But a few years ago, we had classic Formula 1 cars in the game instead of supercars. There was a whole selection of legendary Formula 1 cars from more than 50 years of Formula 1 history. From the McLaren and Ferrari of James Hunt and Niki Lauda, to the Benettons of Michael Schumacher, and even the Brawn GP of Jenson Button. Now, having supercars in F122 is all well and good, but they are inferior to the classic Formula 1 cars in practically every single way, and I'm going to tell you how and why. So the first thing is actually what you're seeing on the screen right now. The classic Formula 1 cars you could view in the showroom, whereas you saw what I had to do with the supercars. They don't have a showroom. I mean, there is the F1 Live Hub, but that's not quite the same thing. You can't rotate the camera freely around the cars like this, or even get a cinematic camera like this, that you can with the normal F1 cars and the F2 cars in F122. Now let's see how many things you can do with the supercars in F122, and well, there's these Pirelli Hot Laps Challenge thingy-majigs that you can do either in career mode or just by themselves through the menus here. And yeah, there's quite a few of them, all of them giving you the ability to drive all the different cars. But guess what? You can't race the supercars. You can take them into time trial, but you can't race them. All you can do is drive them around a track by themselves or do a few challenges with them. Time trial, it's pretty self-explanatory. You're just trying to go as fast as you possibly can in a single lap around a circuit. I can't think of many racing games out there that don't have a time trial mode like this. And whilst most of the challenges are just you on your lonesome doing some things, there are a couple of these rival duel things that give you a feel of what it would be like to race in the supercars. But it's not a full lap, it's just part of the lap. And it's not even a full race. You can't even get a 3-lap race. It's just, there's no racing. This is the only real racing you get, and it's hardly anything because the AI is not very good, even on the hardest difficulty. And now onto the things you can do with the classic cars. And it should come as no great surprise that you can race in the classic Formula 1 cars. Now, sure, they're all quite different, they all have different performance levels. Some cars are more powerful on certain tracks than others. This Ferrari F2004, for example, completely dominates at most of the power tracks, whereas the Red Bull RB6 behind it usually tends to dominate at the more twisty-turny tracks, such as Monaco. However, one needs to remember the sheer scale of the classic cars that you had in the Formula 1 games back until 2020. Because you didn't just have the more modern cars from the 2010s and the 2000s, you also had cars in the 90s, the 80s, and even in 2019 and 18 at least, you had cars from the 70s. In F1 2019, which was the height of F1's classic cars, there were 22 to choose from 3 different racing tiers, and there were multiple different ways of racing with them. You could have a multi-class race like you're seeing here, like it was Le Mans for Formula 1 cars, and you could choose to have either a 2-tier race or a 3-tier race in the 2 games that 3 tiers were available. I mean, what's not to like about Le Mans but Formula 1? Or you could choose to have a single class race where all the racing cars would be from a single classic tier, or as you're seeing here, you could have a spec race where every single driver was in the exact same car. Fun fact, there are more McLaren MP425s in this one race than were ever made in real life. Of course, it doesn't stop at just bog standard Grand Prix racing mode. Like with the Supercars and the normal Formula 1 cars, you can take the various different classic cars into time trial mode around several circuits that they never went around in real life, such as the McLaren MP413 going around the Baku City circuit here. But there was also the now forgotten Championships mode, which was severely neglected towards the end of the classic car's life in the games. Sure, it was all still just racing, but a particular favourite championship of mine was the Sprint Cup Championships, where grid order would be determined by reverse championship standings. And there were the invitational events that are sort of like the Pirelli Hot Laps Challenges in F1 22 now, except with classic Formula 1 cars. Perhaps the biggest gripe I have with the Supercars is mainly that they handle so differently from the standard Formula 1 cars in F1 22. The normal Formula 1 cars have always tended to sort of handle like they're on rails. Sure, they can be unpredictable, but if you tell it to turn right, usually it turns right when you tell it to. And it can do so with very little complaint. But the Supercars, you have to brake very early, turn in very early, you have to be very careful on the throttle because they've got a lot of wheel spin, oddly enough. Compared to the Formula 1 cars, they handle like literal boats. Now, all of the classic Formula 1 cars all handled very differently to one another, but at least they were still Formula 1 cars. They could still grip and turn and accelerate and brake. Sure, they would be all quite different from one another. Like I said before, the Ferrari F2004 is better in a straight line than the Red Bull RB6, but the RB6 can go around a corner a lot better than the F2004. But even the slowest classic car from F1 2018 and 2019, the Lotus 72D, even that was better to drive than any of the supercars in F1 22. However, I have one last point to make about supercars in F1 22, and it's not just that they're inferior to classic cars, it's also that they're completely pointless to have in the F1 games, because why buy the F1 games for supercars when you could just buy Forza or Gran Turismo instead? Codemasters may have thought that no one was playing the classic cars towards the end of each game's life cycle, but trust me, we're only a few months into F1 22 and I've already completely abandoned the supercars because there's just no point. I can drive most of the same supercars in Forza Horizon 5 and still have more fun while doing that. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.